Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending upon your location, and welcome. Welcome to this UNSW online forum on the occasion of World Food Day 2024. My name is Johannes le Coutre. I'm your co-host, and I'm joined by my colleague Jayashree Arcot. We like to start, as is customary in Australia, to acknowledge the country. So I would like to show my respects and acknowledge the Egal people who are the traditional custodians of the land on which this meeting takes place, and to elders past and present. We tried to put together an exciting and meaningful program for this online event today. The official topic by the FAO for World Food Day 2024 is Right to Foods for a Better Life and a Better Future, Leave No One Behind. We at UNSW decided to give it a subtitle and to focus really specifically on food systems innovation in Asia Pacific. And we are joined really by a panel of world-class experts who will be presenting, and we will be hearing about topics such as right to foods issues, as the title says, as well as high consumption of ultra-processed foods. We will be learning about conditional and social cash transfer programs, CCTs and SCTs, from a economical perspective, to really put this into an economical context. We will be talking and hearing about more applied and success stories in this domain, also talking about school meal programs in Sri Lanka, and in the fourth and last presentation then also about biofortification in Africa, Asia and LATAM, something that really is setting the bar very high for a success story in this domain. Speakers will be introduced by my colleague Jayashree Arcot before they speak, and after the four presentations, of which we hope they will last about 15 minutes each, we will then continue the discussion, open up a panel with an additional guest who will join us. We will then be open for questions. In fact, you can, and here I give you just a few housekeeping guidelines. You will be able to put questions into the chat at any time of this event. We will bring up those questions then only at the panel, after all of the presentations. Again, questions from the audience are highly encouraged, and we try to really make sure that all of your questions will be presented. All of your microphones will be muted, as is customary in many webcasts. And I really have one last thing I wanted to mention, because we've been organizing now this event for quite a while. This is something which goes back to being put into life by FAO, and what we really, even though it's online, would like to do is to really also celebrate World Food Day. So this is an informative event. We all want to learn something, but we hope that we also can celebrate. Having said all of this, and now my introduction is finished, over to you, Jayashree.
Thank you, Johannes. It gives me great pleasure today to introduce our speakers, and our very first speaker will be Florence Egal. She's an international expert on sustainable diets and food systems transformation. She's a medical doctor with a master's in public health from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. She's also a food security, nutrition, and livelihoods expert. She spent most of her career in the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, and she started working on urban-related issues in the early 90s. She eventually became the co-secretary of the Food for Cities initiative in FAO until her retirement from the organization in 2013. Since then, she has pursued the promotion of sustainable diets and food systems through a variety of networks and initiatives. She co-led the technical assistance team to the municipality of Milan within the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact process and is presently assisting UN Habitat in the preparation of guiding principles for urban-rural linkages. Over to you, Florence.
Thank you very much, Jayashree, and thank you, Johannes. Thanks for inviting me. I will now try and figure out how the system works for presentation. As Jayashree was saying, my background is essentially UN, so I thought it would be a good thing to set the scene by talking a bit of what has been going on in the last years in that topic. So where are we at right now in terms of right to food and nutrition? We find that you have inequalities in food security and nutrition worldwide. That is within countries, of course, but also within communities and even within households. Why do we have those inequalities? Well, because not everybody has access to or market opportunities for small-scale producers. There are unequal power dynamics between large food corporations and food producers, and unequal access to adequate and nutritious food among consumers. Not everybody can find that food or be able to buy it. When we're talking of marginalized people, you find a bit across the world women, but not all women, of course. I'm not particularly food insecure. Farm workers, migrants, indigenous people, informal workers, people with disabilities, and so on. One major problem that Johannes alluded to that is a major concern in the sphere of nutrition is that there is an increased exposure to ultra-processed foods. This is actually the fastest growing segment of the global food supply, and it has driven an increase, we now call an epidemic of diet-related non-communicable diseases worldwide. We eat too much, certainly convenient food, but usually with too much sugar, too much salt, etc. So we have a problem there. But this food is also a problem. If you want to have the same foods in all the shelves of the supermarkets worldwide, you need to control the whole chain. That means you have to start from this only one variety, which has to be standard worldwide, and then go through the system down the food chain. Now, that means there is a big loss of biodiversity, which is a major concern nowadays. There are, I don't know how many hundreds of varieties of rice, and we only use a few because we need to standardize, and standardization may not be always the solution. We lose, or we have lost, a lot of indigenous knowledge that would be useful if we want to think for a future. So it would be good to see how we can best use the resources where we live. The result of that economically driven system is that you have increased socioeconomic gaps, with the paradox that the people that are producing the food are the ones that go hungry. It's a simplification, but overall, it is a major issue. So there's poverty, and people migrate. They leave the farm, they go to cities, or they have to leave some areas because they're kicked out of those areas to grow commercial, have intensive commercial production systems. So this is, I know you've all seen probably that image, but we do have a problem with the concentration. As you can see from this image, there's a lot of concentration. I have put in that presentation links to sites. So if students or others are interested to go to some of those things, if they're not aware of them, please, I hope that the presentations will be available. So in front of that picture, what has happened in terms of right to food? In 1999, it has been acknowledged that the UN Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights that right to food is crucial to all human rights. Not all countries have endorsed this. I'm not sure Australia has, or the US, but anyway, in 2004, the Committee on World Food Security has endorsed voluntary guidelines to support the progressive realization of the right to food in the context of national food security. This was a major event which actually sets, we are now at the 20th anniversary of that event this year, which is why right to food has been selected as a theme for World Food Day. In 2015, in the 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development, that's when we started talking of SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, leave no one behind has been at the heart of this agenda. All people in all countries should benefit from development and the full realization of human rights and no discrimination. 2021, there was the UN Food Systems Summit. There's been a follow-up 2 years later. There will be another follow-up next year. And the realization was that food system transformation is essential if we want to achieve sustainable development. In 2021, voluntary guidelines on food security and nutrition. I didn't put the links of all of those things. It's extremely easy to find online. And now in 2023, high-level panel of experts of the Committee on World Food Security has been publishing a paper for reducing inequalities for food security and nutrition. Now, the point is, if we're not going to be able to have sustainable food systems if we do not look at human rights and social justice. It's important that small-scale producers have more equal access to production resources. We need to make sure that food and agriculture research is sensitive to equity consideration and the needs of marginalized groups. We need to develop value chains that are inclusive, integrate universal healthcare into nutrition initiatives. Social protection, will have a presentation on that afterwards, which is essential for responding food crisis and reducing food security and nutrition inequalities. And one point I'm particularly interested in is we need to implement territorial multi-sector approaches to food system development. We cannot just stay at a national level. Countries are very often heterogeneous. So a few years ago, it was agreed upon, and that was in the 2010 or something like that, the notion of sustainable diets was actually put on the paper. And what would be sustainable diets? They need, of course, to be nutritionally adequate. They need to be safe, and they need to be healthy. So ultra-processed foods are not really there. They need to be culturally acceptable, accessible, and economically fair and affordable. And they need to have a low environmental impact, therefore respecting biodiversity and ecosystems. In 2019, there was a technical meeting in Rome organized by the Foundation and WHO, the World Health Organization, which had a committee on experts, and you had Australian experts also in there, working on guiding principle for sustainable healthy diets, which you will find in the link provided. As I said before, if we go beyond political borders that we consider now the borders, we can see that you have ecosystems that cut across those borders. And in those ecosystems, there is usually you can more easily look at the cultural issues, the geographical ecosystem issues, the social issues, etc. It's easier if you go to those areas. And of course, our institutions are not set up for that. Because of course, Australia, your institutions are dealing with the country. You don't have much cross-border areas. But in many other parts of the world, you have areas that cut across borders. And it's very rare that the two countries are actually discussing together and getting people in those areas around the same table. So, right to food, great. Now, you will see from this map that how that has been translated concretely depends a lot on the countries. And you will see you have countries, in particular the ones that are in more the purple colors, have really done a lot of work. So a lot of them has put the right to food in their constitutions. And you have, I won't go into details on that, just it's sufficient to say that it differs on the countries, and you should check in your own country what you've done, and in that link you can find that out. Because it's great to have, right to food is great. So we have that global principle, fantastic. If you come down, tools to make this happen, but there's very little. So people have started thinking, what are we going to do? So the first publication I'm quoting has been done by FAO with the University of Laval in Canada, and look at what are the legislative interventions needed to improve nutrition and sustainability. Because with the present legal and regulatory framework, it's going to be extremely difficult to have sustainable food systems. They're going to be illegal one way or the other, because along the years and the decades, there's a series of rules that have sedimented there and that have never been made in terms of thinking sustainability, but more hygiene or economic viability, etc. So a lot of people have been actually have lost their livelihoods because of some of these interventions. So we need a rule of law if we want food system transformation. This is another reference. FAO has a whole unit working on policy support and governance, and right to food is at the heart of this. One of the most interesting things is the work that's being done increasingly with legislators. When I was working with the United Nations, I had people telling me, this is great. You're working with the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Health, and whatever. This is the executive arm of the UN. The people that are passing the laws are the members of parliament. And you never talk with us. And the only people that talk with us very often are more related, shall we say, to corporate interests. And therefore now there's been quite a lot of work going on getting parliaments involved, informed, and putting food system transformation at the heart of the agenda of parliaments. As I said before, we need to review the legal and regulatory context. You go to an area, shall we say, an area of any of your countries, you say you're going to go to look at that territory. Look, what are the problems? What are the laws? What are the regulations? And are these leaving no one behind? Or are these actually obstacles that we need to go around? For example, in the US, there is now a waiver for school canteens. They can buy local products, they can buy organic foods, but it's a waiver because it goes against the whole trade legislation there is in the country. So in many places, people are starting to see which are those obstacles, exchanging experience on how we can move forward. Food industry, and I know a lot of you are working with food industry, you're of course major players. So very interesting signs. In 2021 at the World Food Summit, major corporation issued a business declaration for food system transformation. And now there is more and more work being done on ensuring corporate accountability for food system transformation. So we need the food industry to move forward. Food science and technology. We really need all of you for Right to Food. Because If we don't, we need technologies that are practical, affordable, and sustainable. So we need to know what are the local practices before we start imposing other things. Try and see how we can improve those, how we can diversify. We need to produce foods that can contribute in those territories to revive the economy and give people jobs and get a better use of the local biodiversity species, and be in line with the culture. And I think that this is happening increasingly, in particular in Europe. You go to areas now, it's become a major aspect of ecotourism. You want to eat the food which is from that area, and the more traditional it is, the better it is. So I think there is a fashion that consumers are starting to look at these issues. In order to have, what can these technologies do? They can ensure permanent access to convenience and healthy and safe foods. I'm thinking in particular on complementary feeding. In most countries in the world, the transition from breastfeeding is, the countries have traditional complementary feeding. Very often these are completely ignored, and the people are encouraged to go and buy, whether they have the money or not, the perfect things from the local supermarket. Now, there's a lot of work that's been done also to start from people's local practices and see with them how to improve it, which has been inducing men to change the way they were planting their fields, because they say, okay, if we need that to have good complementary feeding, I need to grow a little of that because I wasn't growing it before. So it's really interesting. It's particularly important to save labor and time. And okay, I'm a woman, but I think that all of you are, if I don't know what I would do with some of the pre-processed foods I'm using, I don't have the time. I remember in Somalia, people saying, I can only give my child porridge once a day because I don't have time to grind the grains 3 times a day. So all these technologies, having improved meals locally, etc., are very important. We need to reduce post-harvest food losses, fight food waste. We need to support local food distribution and trade. And this will generate income and jobs, in particular for youth, for women, for landless laborers, for migrants. These people will never have access to land, or it's going to be very difficult. In all our countries, we know what are the challenges. But they can add a lot of value to the local system and make jobs which can have jobs that are often allow them to be closer from home, less physically demanding, and overall benefit the whole community. And what I think also there is going to be a need is to modify the academic curricula. I was in a national Spanish Food Science and Technology Congress. Little, if any, exposure to any of the above, and in particular to social sciences, political economy. None of those issues were actually, they knew everything about technologies and labs, etc. So we need you, please. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Florence. That was a lovely introduction to human rights and social equity being an entry point to transform the current food systems in some countries. I now have the pleasure of introducing Emmanuel Skoufias. He's from the National University of Singapore. He earned a BA from UC Berkeley and a PhD in economics from the University of Minnesota. He began his career at Penn State and the University of Colorado before joining the International Food Policy Research Institute in 1998, where he led the evaluation of Mexico's Progresa program. From 2004 to 2022, he worked as a lead economist at the World Bank, focusing on poverty and equity across Latin America, Africa, South Asia, and East Asia. His work specializes in using microdata to analyze poverty, household welfare, risk management, and the impacts of climate change on welfare. Emmanuel has published over 65 peer-reviewed papers and 2 books, one on child stunting and another on the poverty impacts of climate change. He's going to talk to us today about increased food security through stronger social protection systems. Over to you, Emmanuel.
Thank you. I will switch to my presentation. Yes, and thank you all for, especially the conference organizers, for inviting me to present. I will, as I said, I will emphasize I will focus on the role of social protection in increasing food security. And the fact is that the world's farmers produce enough food to feed more than the global population. The problem is that hunger and food insecurity are still very high. There are about 733 million people that are facing hunger in the world because of repeated weather shocks, conflicts, economic crisis, inequality, and the pandemic. Now, we've been mentioning so far food security, but we didn't sort of define it. Well, I just wanted to just spend a few minutes. Food security is commonly conceptualized as having 4 pillars: availability, access, utilization, and stability. By availability, we mean there's enough food, and we know that there is plenty of food around. The problem is the other factors, really. Access, which is about the income of the household and its ability to use to access this food. Utilization is more about the getting the best or the most out of the food that is consumed and making sure that it's properly handled and all the nutrients are benefiting the household. And stability, again, is about basically having a stable availability and access and utilization of food, not go through periods where you don't have any of these. So the fact is that food insecurity, as defined, is particularly prevalent among poor and vulnerable households, many of whom are agricultural households in different parts of the world. And within households, the group that is most vulnerable to food insecurity are children, because for them, an adequate diet and nutrition foods, especially early in life, are critical for a proper development as adults. Now, the fact is there's food insecurity and there's poverty, and most countries, or many countries, have responded to all these challenges by building what social protection schemes, which are essentially consist of conditional cash transfer programs, or CCTs, or what you could call social cash transfer programs. And these programs, for the most part, target the poor. What are these social protection programs? What are the main components of these social protection programs? Well, basically, conditional cash transfer programs are welfare programs that give money to households in exchange for meeting certain requirements. For example, they compensate families every month for sending their children to school on a regular basis and for having regular visits to health centers on a regular basis. So the goals of CCT programs are to reduce primarily poverty in the short term, but then poverty in many cases is associated with food insecurity. So even some programs don't even talk about food insecurity directly. They talk about poverty, but it's always implicit that food insecurity is one of their objectives. And these programs also aim to reduce long-term poverty by increasing human capital, basically through the improvement of health and nutrition and the education of children, so that when children become adults, they will be healthier and better educated. So a number of countries have adopted these kinds of programs. Many countries around the world. In East Asia Pacific, there's Indonesia, Philippines, and Cambodia, for example, have these programs, and they cover millions and millions of households. And these programs originally started in Mexico, then was sort of followed by Brazil, Colombia, and they also spread in Africa and Asia, South Asia, like Bangladesh, Nigeria in Africa, Turkey, Egypt. And in Latin America especially, they are very, very popular. And many governments use these programs. Now, as I said, these programs are mainly targeted towards the poor. They give the people or the groups that are eligible for these kinds of social protection schemes are the poor. But in the past few years, or since the establishment of these programs, it has become more and more clear that these programs, which are aimed against poverty, they also manage to reduce food insecurity. Africa was sort of relatively a latecomer in these conditional cash transfer programs, and in Africa, they don't necessarily, the governments that adopted these programs, they don't necessarily have conditions. They just give the money without any conditions, and that's why they call them social cash transfer programs, not conditional cash transfer programs. And in Africa, because they sort of entered relatively later into the process, food security is the main objective of these programs. Now, in theory, and as I said, it turns out that also in practice, these types of programs can have an important and significant impact on all four dimensions of food security. Basically, through increased purchasing power, so households may invest in their agricultural prices and increase household level production. So availability of food increases, but also households have increased economic access to food because they have more income, and they're able to purchase more food and more diversified products. And also they increase the stability of household income, and therefore that leads to a more stable consumption of food across time and reduce food gaps over the year. Now, I did not mention here utilization, but in fact, it's important to note that these conditional cash transfer programs also, as practiced at least in many Latin American countries, they also include sort of training sessions whereby the local health workers have regular meetings with the beneficiary families and talk to them about proper cooking practices, like not boiling your vegetables too much, and proper hygiene practices for cooking and for taking care of children and feces and all that stuff. So all these training sessions have been proven to be also quite effective in the utilization of the utilization component of food security. Now, as I said, there's been evidence. The question is, we call them conditional cash transfer programs. If you give cash to families, do they increase food security? Well, there have been, and I was part of the original evaluations of the first conditional cash transfer program. It was called Progresa in Mexico, and this program had a rigorous evaluation in '99, and one of the main sort of findings that we came up with was that the cash transfers, and even though they were primarily intended to compensate households for sending their children to school, had very significant impacts on consumption and food diversity. Basically, even though the program didn't require this, by giving these payments to the households for sending their children to school, households or mothers decided to acquire more calories from fruits and vegetables and animal products. So that was the original evaluation, which sort of gave the sign that food security is impacted significantly by the availability of cash to the poorer households. And then there were other impact evaluations that followed for other programs in other countries, and they all showed the same thing, that food security is increased because of these payments to the poorer households. In Africa, also there was a recent review of 8 social cash transfer programs and evaluation of the evaluations. And all these these meta-analysis of the programs and impacts showed that there was a large impact on food security. Consumption increased, and the quality of diets increased, and the experience of food insecurity went down. Now, again, an eternal sort of concern and debate about in the context of giving of trying to decrease food security, increase food security, is whether one should give cash or in-kind food transfers. Again, there's a lot of debate about that. A lot of people think that if people need food, you should give them food. You shouldn't give them cash because they can take the cash and use it for other things, and that may not necessarily help in reducing food insecurity. There was a very recent evaluation which used a randomized control trial methods in Indonesia, which is in the neighborhood here. And this study evaluated the impact of switching the food assistance in a major program from in-kind, which was rice, to an electronic voucher-based program. So originally they were giving rice, so they were moving tons and tons, millions of tons of rice from across the country to distribute as a benefit to the households, and then they decided, the government decided to switch to electronic voucher-based program, where basically you're given almost like a card, a voucher, and that you can use to buy food in the local stores. So the evaluation revealed that the vouchers managed to concentrate the aid towards poorer households who were in principle the target of the program. So even though the original, the amount of the transfer in terms of value that was given to households when they switched from in-kind to a cash transfer was the same, it turns out that more of the money reached the beneficiary households. So basically 46% more assistance was received on net in voucher areas compared to in-kind areas. Another way to put it is, when you have in-kind transfers, you get a lot of leakages where there's lots of middlemen, in the process, local village chiefs, local, even truck drivers, all these kinds of middlemen that, somehow you see a lot of rice being lost in the process, and what the government sends and what the household receives is quite different. So basically, the switch to the electronic voucher-based program led to a reduction in poverty, a significant reduction in poverty. And of course, the cost of operating the voucher-based program were less than half of the in-kind program. Now, I guess the main lesson that can be derived from this process is, yes, cash may be better than in-kind transfers, but I think the other lesson is that what matters more is how these programs are administered, and that may be a much more important determinant of the relative effectiveness of these programs, at least in countries where there's limited administrative capacity. So what do we learn from this is that basically the current practice of targeting the poor is also able to address chronic poverty and food insecurity. The problem is that climate change and increasing frequency and intensity of climate-related shocks basically requires these programs now to become more flexible. There's the problem of transient food insecurity, or basically because of lack of stability, because of lack of rainfall or economic crisis. A lot of households who were previously not food insecure now become food insecure. When things improve later, then they sort of slide back into food security. So there's a lot of shocks out there that are pushing households in and out of poverty, as well as into in and out of food insecurity. So the targeting of these programs that have been of these conditional cash transfer programs and the social cash transfer programs basically needs to be directed towards those that are vulnerable to poverty, and not just to the poor or the chronically food insecure household. So I think the challenge now that countries are facing is to move to what is called an adaptive social protection scheme, which is, this is the picture that sort of describes an adaptive social protection scheme, where you have the gray square there is the conditional cash transfer program, which essentially targets the poor, the chronically poor households, or the chronically food insecure households, and this program can enlarge or expand vertically or horizontally, depending on the need or depending on the shock that sort of takes place at the country level or at the regional level. So that's what you call an adaptive social protection scheme, and that's where countries need or are aiming to move as we sort of getting deeper and deeper into the climate change era, where shocks are more frequent and more intense and therefore you have more movements of households in and out of poverty and food insecurity. So with this, I'll stop, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Emmanuel. That was very insightful indeed, looking at the economics of the whole issue of insecurity or providing food security. We now have the next speaker, and I have the pleasure of inviting Kalana. He's from the United Nations World Food Programme in Sri Lanka. He's a leading figure at the United Nations WFP, specializing in the intersection of nutrition, resilience, and agriculture in Sri Lanka. His recent work includes evaluating the impacts of resilience programs aimed at improving the livelihoods and diet quality of rural farming communities. He has contributed to several key projects that assess food security, particularly within the context of climate shocks and social protection. His focus is on strengthening food systems to enhance both nutritional outcomes and community resilience. Over to you, Kalana.
Yeah, thank you. Can I have the slides? Yeah, all right, thank you. So yeah, as Jayashree pointed out, I'm going to briefly highlight the school meal programs in Sri Lanka and how it addresses some of the food security and nutrition issues in Sri Lanka. And WFP has been supporting the government of Sri Lanka since for the last two, 3 decades to bring the school meal program to a sustainable and program under full national ownership. So as we know, this period from pregnancy to 21 years, which is also called the 8,000 days, is a very important period in life when it comes to the human capital of the country, and we all know the relationship between the human capital and the economic growth of countries. So as a middle-income country, Sri Lanka has identified this linkage and looking towards improving the education of nutrition and food security to the people who are in this age group and the families who have children and young people belonging to this age group. However, over the years, we've been talking about wasting micronutrient deficiencies and rising overweight and obesity trends among this age group. I've highlighted a couple of statistics here from 2021 and 2022, where there is a rising trend in particularly wasting levels among children between 5 and 9 years of age, which is really the primary school age group in the country, which lays the foundation for not only learning but also the physical health as well as they move towards the growth spurt in their adolescence. So the main reason behind this increase was the recent economic crisis and because of the exponential rise in the food prices, and not only food but also the general inflation, very high inflation that we see. We are seeing from early 2022. And this has been, this is a food consumption survey done in 2021, actually predating the economic crisis, but we already see that consumption of fish, meat, even eggs are on the lower side even before the economic crisis. And what we saw was as the economic crisis progressed, consumption of these particularly fruits, dairy, and even protein-rich food were declining. So in this context, one of the main reasons for this decline was found to be the increase in the cost of the nutritious diet. So let me talk about the cost of the diet in very brief. This is a methodology that we using a linear programming tool that we can model a standard or typical hypothetical diet that could fulfill either nutritional, the whole range of nutritional needs, or just the energy requirements, and come up with the minimum cost at which that diet could be met. So in 2022, when this was analyzed in the middle of the economic crisis, we could see that the energy-only diet was around 500 rupees per household per day, whereas the nutritious diet was almost 4 times or 3.6 times more costly, which meant that, well, people were surviving, but particularly the vulnerable groups, particularly those who were in the first 8,000 days, were probably having an energy-only diet, but not fulfilling their full plethora of nutritional needs. As you can see in the bottom, only 3 food groups might fulfill an energy-only diet, whereas more than 5 food groups were needed to fulfill nutritious diet. And yes, you can see the food items, food groups that are anyway underconsumed are featuring in a more nutritious diet. And quite significantly, when we analyze the affordability of this nutritious diet, not only 47 or only 53% of the population was able to afford this nutritious diet, as opposed to more than 89% of the population were able to afford the energy-only diet, which meant again that people may be consuming just what they need to survive, but may not be able to thrive, especially the children and the pregnant and lactating women. And as one of the speakers highlighted, we have to have a look at what is the situation in different regions, and as you can see, there is quite a bit of variation among the various regions in the country. where some regions are particularly more affected than the others. So how is this linked to school meals? So when we model interventions as to what can we do to address the issue of high cost of nutritious meals, nutritious diet, what we can see is that school meal, by providing a school meal, to a child between 6 to 7 years of age would bring down the cost of the diet for that child by 19%. Of course, that cost is borne by somebody else, or the government mainly, but for the household, that cost is getting reduced. And a similar analysis done in 2018 along with the Fill the Nutrition Gap analysis shows that if you use fortified food like fortified rice in the school meal, the reduction of the cost is even more pronounced. So we come to the National School Meal Program, which Sri Lankan government had prioritized from as far as 1931. But the school meal was in different phases, different modalities, and its nutritional value varied across time. But since 2016, as a fully government-owned program, the National School Meal Program aims to reduce the nutritional problems and improve the food security among these vulnerable children. And it also has objectives to increase attendance and educational performance. And currently, the school meal program is until March 2024, it was reaching around 7,900 schools, which is around 83% of the total number of schools in Sri Lanka, and reaching around 1.1 million children, mainly in the primary age group, which is 5 to 9. And although it is, in terms of coverage of schools, it is 83%, in terms of coverage of the number of primary level students, this was 67%. And this is why the government decided to expand the program to cover all primary schools in the country. And the decision came in March 2024, in the middle of the fiscal year. But a policy decision has been taken, and probably we will see that this will be financed during next year. I have the budget information. I don't know if the slide shows the budgetary allocations. The budgets allocated for 2024 amounts to around 16.5 billion Sri Lankan rupees. That is close to around 30 million US dollars. When they expand it to 1.5 million children, that means the budget will increase to around 30 billion Sri Lankan rupees. We are hopeful that the government will allocate the full amount that is necessary for next year, because they understand and prioritize the school meal program as one of the main interventions to increase the human capital in the country. And when we look at school meals, both nutritional quality and costs need to be taken into consideration as a middle income country. So WFP has been supporting the Ministry of Education and the government of Sri Lanka to balance this by having sort of like prescribed menus that can be adapted locally to ensure that the food items are both affordable and that they provide the necessary nutritional meet the necessary nutritional targets. And when we consider this balancing the nutritional aspect and cost, one of the main ways to that we can manage this is by what we call homegrown school feeding, which is linking the local smallholder farmers with this directly with the school meal providers, so that so much of the costs that are added in the middle in the supply chain are bypassed. And WFP has been supporting the government of Sri Lanka to implement this in an expanded pilot, reaching around 200,000 children and 2,500 school meal suppliers in 7 districts across the country. And we see that a big impact is made, particularly on the supply of eggs to the school meal. The basic concept of this is like by linking the smallholder farmers with the local with the school meal providers that will provide fresh affordable vegetables, fruits and poultry products to the school meal in a sustainable way, so that while ensuring that there is a nutritious meal to the school children, it will be running at a sustainable cost. And school meals also provide an avenue to influence the food habits, behaviors and attitudes around healthy food. Like one of the presenters earlier highlighted, ultra-processed foods and consumption of ultra-processed food is becoming an issue, and also obesity is a rising trend. This is very important to inculcate healthy food behaviors from early in life, and school meals provide avenues, entry points for programmers to incorporate social behavior change and communication into the programs. Then food safety is an important aspect. We've been working with local universities and University of New South Wales, Australia, and the team there to look at how to improve food safety in school meals. Like locally, we've come up with a validated food hygiene index that is simple enough to be used by school teachers and principals, and a simplified version is being developed to be used by the children themselves. So this can be a participatory exercise, and not going beyond assessment of the risk. The University of New South Wales has supported us developing a food safety pocketbook, which is targeting the school meal supplies, and training of trainers and a master training program is currently underway. Then Sri Lanka has been an active member of the Global School Meal Coalition since 2022, and Sri Lanka declared 12 bold commitments, which includes expansion of the school meal program to be universal by 2040. And this has resulted in support, getting support from the Global School Meal Coalition to now. The research consortium in the Global School Meal Coalition has reported a case study, a compilation, which is almost finalized, and we are about to start a value for money or a return on investment study on the school meal program. And then the idea is to engage with the government of Sri Lanka to look at how to sustainably finance the school meal programs, while the government is looking at expanding it to be universal, reaching around 4 million school children in the country. And I will stop at that. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Kalana. That was an interesting presentation about a success story in Sri Lanka. We now move on to the next speaker, who's associated with 3 institutions: the International Food Policy Research Institute, Harvest Plus, and Wageningen University and Research. Sakile Kudita has more than 20 years experience working working at the nexus of agribusiness, seed systems, food security, and nutrition. Before joining Harvest Plus, she worked as a seed expert at CDTO, during which time she helped establish a farmer seed enterprise, now operating as Champion Farmer Seeds. She has also worked as a regional gene bank manager at ICRISAT and also as a research officer at CIMMEET. Sakile holds a BSc degree in crop science from the University of Zimbabwe, a master's in applied microbiology and biotechnology from the National University of Science and Technology, and an MBA from the same university. She is also currently studying towards a PhD at Wageningen University, with her research focused on upgrading traditional processing of fermented cereals for improved nutrition and health. Over to Sakile to talk to us about some biofortification programs that she has been involved in.
Thank you very much. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Depending on where you're joining from, it's a pleasure to be part of this presentation. I'm going to talk about food systems innovation, of course, in Asia Pacific, but the focus of my presentation will be on biofortification. Okay, so I suppose the challenges with the food system as it currently is have been well articulated by the previous speakers, and there is consensus, I think general consensus actually, that we are in an era where food systems are in urgent need of transformation, just because there's so many challenges. And the previous speaker has already alluded to the cost of a healthy diet, which is increasing yearly and currently globally sits, of course, at $3.96 per person per day, with more than 71% of the global population not being able to afford it. And most of these are in the low to middle income countries. So this results in most people having to rely on poor diets, which are non-diverse, staple-based. They may be calorie sufficient, but unfortunately they are lacking in vitamins and minerals. And this results in a global problem of micronutrient malnutrition, a condition that is commonly known as hidden hunger The map shown in the slide shows you the areas where the hidden hunger problem is most prevalent. The most vulnerable groups to hidden hunger are women of childbearing age, that is 15 to 49 years of age, where 2 in 3 are deficient in iron, zinc, or folate, as well as children under the age of 5, where 1 in 2 are deficient in iron, zinc, and vitamin A. And when children have hidden hunger, or even the women, they are at risk of visual impairment, adverse pregnancy outcomes, and children have a weakened immune system when they're deficient in vitamin A, and therefore vulnerable and most likely to fall very sick or even lose their lives to common childhood ailments. The other challenges are impaired brain development, stunting, and anemia. Okay, so, well, the dilemma of staples being the most affordable and most accessible, and yet being not so rich in micronutrients, led to a question which was asked by Howard Du Bois, which is, how about breeding staples to contain more micronutrients? Well, at that time, when he asked that question, which is more than 20 years ago, it sounded like an impossibility. But fast forward, that question and the answers to it led to the birth of the technology of biofortification, which is the increasing the density of vitamins and minerals in crops through either conventional plant breeding or agronomic practices or biotechnology. And it is through biofortification actually earned Howard Boyce the World Food Prize in 2016. So I would like to talk to you about the journey from that idea and from that question to where we are now regarding biofortification. And I'll take you through the proof of concept stage, the development of the biofortified varieties, their dissemination, and the phase where we are now, which is the rapid scale up of biofortified varieties. So many questions had to be asked before biofortification became a full-fledged technology for dissemination. That is it feasible? Can conventional breeding add extra nutrients in the crops without reducing yields? So we had to look at crop genetic diversity, look at the heritability of nutrient content, and the stability of the traits across different environments. The other questions they asked were on efficacy. That is, when people consume these high nutrient dense staples, will the nutrients be bioavailable? And will they bring about the desired increase in micronutrient levels, as well as bearing cognizant to the possible post-harvest losses? And the other issues were to do with consumer acceptance. Will people accept, or will they be willing to grow and consume the biofortified varieties? And the proof of concept research showed that indeed many were willing and able, and most of the questions asked there came out with a tick. So this led to the development stage. And I'm glad to say that to date, we have more than 443 biofortified varieties of 13 staple crops, and they have been released in 41 countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And this is all thanks to the wonderful efforts of many academic institutions, the CG centers, and all the government research programs. The great collaboration and partnership has resulted in this success in the availability of biofortified varieties within such a short time. So the most commonly consumed biofortified varieties are of pearl millet, mainly in India, beans in Africa, Asia, Latin America, the wheat, rice, also mainly in Asian countries, and then in Africa, maize is an important staple, and also we have the biofortified maize, rich in zinc. And then rich in vitamin A, we have vitamin A sweet potatoes, yellow cassava, and vitamin A rich maize. So the next phase was the dissemination. To date, we have more than 330 million people consuming biofortified foods. 100 million of them are from farming households, and more than 230 from the market, and also through the social protection programs. So the dissemination phase involved a lot of work in terms of seed systems development. The biofortified varieties had to be released and entered into the seed system, and the private seed companies had to come into play to be able to disseminate and sell the seed to the farmers. And also the activities involved a lot of awareness creation and marketing, nutrition education for people to accept and realize the importance of the healthy diets and the investment in them. Also demo plots, cooking demos and exhibitions, as well as a lot of radio informational campaigns and social media campaigns. Okay. So, well, post development, the next natural phase is that of rapid scale up of the biofortified varieties, with the realization that for the biofortified varieties to bring about the desired change, they have to be consumed by a sizable proportion of the population, and they have to be entrenched into the food system so that they are driven through the natural ways that food moves. So and this involved interventions across the entire value chain for the different crops, right from agricultural research to make sure that more diverse and better yielding varieties of the biofortified varieties are available, right through to seed and vine multiplication, to the agro dealers to make sure that the seed is available to the farmers timeously, and also the actual production by the farmers and aggregation activities, also improving the efficiency of aggregation to right through to processing and retailing. It's important at this stage also to note that this is a very difficult phase, the rapid scale up, because you need to be putting interventions at all the nodes of the value chain almost simultaneously, because the farmers will need seed for them to grow, and the seed companies want to be sure that farmers are going to buy the seed when they multiply it, in as much as retailers and processors also want to make sure that there is enough supply before they can process, and farmers also want to know that there is a market when they do produce. So it's a delicate balance across the value chain. But I'm glad to report that there is a lot of change, and we have seen a lot of biofortified crops now being commercially available in the market. So biofortification indeed has many advantages. It is based on the staples, which are most affordable and most widely consumed, and that gives them a very easy cultural fit, because this is what people are used to and familiar with. The other advantage of the technology itself is equitable access. That is, it is readily available to all members of the household, and has the advantage of being able to reach the groups that often do get missed by other interventions like commercial fortification. That is, the farmers who rely mostly on what they grow for food. It has also been proven in terms of its efficacy, and it is indeed a cost-effective technology, because an upfront investment in breeding in the development of the varieties results in the lasting impact as farmers harvest and grow and harvest, so they get to benefit harvest after harvest from their normal farming activities. But this is not to say that the technology has no disadvantages. I think, admittedly, a lot more still needs to be done for biofortification to be scaled up and become an integral part of the existing food chain. The technology is also still very young. This means that a lot is known, yes, but a lot still needs to be known. So there's a lot of research around biofortification, and rightfully so. And there is more knowledge to be discovered, and also a lot of room for improving the technology. There is also a risk as we promote these biofortified varieties of the loss in genetic diversity. So we need to be very careful not to move from a narrow gene pool of hybrids and improved non-biofortified varieties to another narrow gene pool of improved biofortified varieties. So we need to maintain genetic diversity at crop level and also be careful not to lose diversity at the field level as well. I would like to say that biofortified varieties are indeed not a silver bullet. They are important. They are an important technology, but alone they cannot solve all the problems that we have in the food system or in the need for supplying people with micronutrients. We know that most governments have a four-pronged approach to micronutrient malnutrition, and rightfully so. So we have supplementation, which is ongoing. We have commercial fortification, and we also continue to encourage dietary diversity, and now biofortification as a piece of the puzzle for tackling the problem of micronutrient malnutrition. I think it's important also for me to mention that biofortified crops ideally should be a part of a healthy, diverse diet. And as we promote the biofortified varieties, we have to also remember to look onto those that are naturally biofortified, our local indigenous crops that are high in nutrients but that we are losing, and preserve those as well. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sakile. That was a very good presentation telling us about the progress made with biofortification with several staple crops, and that's great to hear. Now, before I hand over to Johannes for the panel discussion, I was just wanting to invite all the speakers, if they had anything to add to each other's presentation at this point in time. I think this would be a good time for you to do that. So you're welcome to add to each other's presentations. Yes, Florence.
Yes, thank you very much. Really interesting presentations. A couple of points. I very much enjoy Emmanuel's presentation on social protection. I've been following this coming from a public health background. Now, I was extremely surprised a few years ago. I was training foresters in how they could improve household food security. And so that looks very distant. But I've asked them to get into working groups, and the Latin American group decided that they were going to focus on problems the enemies that had been induced by social conditional cash transfer programs. What was happening there is that there was a very successful nutrition program, and women were getting vouchers, and they were going to the supermarket. Now, the problem is, until then, there was very little supermarket. So this mechanism was really useful to push supermarkets. But the reason the people brought that as a food security issue is that the farmers that were selling on the local markets had lost their jobs. So you improve the nutrition of the child, but daddy loses jobs. So in the end, there was a poverty issue. And I think now there is a lot of thinking, and I hope that research and evaluation should look at the impact on local economies, because with the best intentions, we kind of sometimes miss out on these kind of things. The second point is I very much enjoyed also Sakile's presentation, and indigenous knowledge is really key. In the different bioregions that were mentioned on that map, there are a variety of local foods that nobody has ever researched. We don't know what the nutrition content is, and therefore, it would be important at the same time we do biofortification that we actually put money to actually measure the nutrient content of this, so that we can support traditional diets, which will be done with local foods. You don't need to buy seeds. You use the seeds you're used to. You have community seeds garden. So I think parallelly improved household diets could come by retrieving traditional food practices and improving them rather than coming from the outside. And my last point would be on the role of consumers. There's a lot of discussions in the chat of what can we do. I think as consumers, we can decide where we put our money and what we're going to buy so that we feed our own families, and we talk with our friends. We also have a role in advocacy there. So I think that getting food on the political agenda is really something very important because it's in everybody's life. Thank you very much.
All right.
Johannes.
Okay, we're having here some sorry about that. I mute? No, you need to mute. Sorry, guys. We're all in the same room here. That makes it a bit sort of tricky, but I think we're getting there. Let me first, we're starting now a panel with all speakers, and let me really thank you all right now. So Florence, Emmanuel, Kalana, and Sakile, this was quite I think complimentary, insightful, exciting, and interesting. We have I don't want to say a latecomer, but we have an additional guest. And we just were trying to juggle. We wanted her to participate, but we also wanted to have enough time for discussion. So it is now my real pleasure to also invite to the panel, and I take it the camera guy is switching that on. Angela Kearney, who is the UNICEF representative, serving currently as the UNICEF representative ad interim in Papua New Guinea, overseeing critical humanitarian efforts in the country. With her extensive experience in child protection and emergency response, Angela plays a key role in coordinating UNICEF's interventions, particularly in the wake of crises such as natural disasters and tribal violence. Angela, thank you very much for joining us and for also accepting to join us without having your own presentation. Maybe you just say a few words on what you're doing with UNICEF right now, and then we do have in the chat quite a number of questions which I want to get at, and at the very end I will take the prerogative of asking my questions to everybody. And everybody's microphones should be switched on by now, I take it.
Yeah.
Angela.
So thank you very much for inviting UNICEF, and it's really been a fantastic afternoon, and I have my nutrition colleagues sitting around the table with me here in Papua New Guinea. I think that one of the key things is that the UN, so we've had luckily experience from FAO and the World Food Programme today, and of course WHO, but also we need the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights, all of those other organisations that go within the UN to support this food security. And one of the things I don't think we've spoken about today is that all of the education systems need to support, and especially women and girls. So when we have this terrible crisis of stunting, actually in Papua New Guinea we think it's even up to 50%. And if you aren't able to educate the girls through school, the chance of child marriage is much higher. The chance of having anemia in the mother is much higher, of a small for dates baby, and all of those things that happen. So the holistic side is what UNICEF and others would be very interested in this discussion. And the very worrying part of the increase in obesity, but also the increase in stunting, and working in a country like Papua New Guinea that has seas and mountains and a fantastic way of planting, but you will often see a mum giving her kid 2-minute noodles, and actually we're very worried about the latest sort of appetite suppressor where they give the little kids one of those beef cubes that we usually put in cooking, and they put it into the child's mouth so that the child gets some taste and then doesn't cry. And of course, that burns a hole in the child's mouth and it doesn't give them any nutritional value. So it's all of that education side that I think that we want to be looking at. Of course, the food fortification, but that we heard a new term, I hadn't heard the 7,000 days, but the 1,000 days, and we cannot forget it. A healthy mother who chooses to be pregnant, who has all of the minerals and the vitamins that she needs in pregnancy. So for the first thing, and then the 2 years and the exclusive breastfeeding with all of the nutrition that goes for maternal health there. So it's a real worrying. I mean, I worked last year in Syria and the year before in Somalia, and where you see, you know, mums walking through the desert of Somalia through a famine and leaving, you know, the men behind with dead animals, basically. But then seeing in Papua New Guinea, a country that really should have very good nutrition, up to 50% stunting, and that's a quality of food that the children need. And as I said, maybe 2-minute noodles rather than some sweet potato and some sugar cane and all of those things. So I just see it as a holistic thing that the UN can do together. And we very much appreciate the scientists. So my team and I have been really excited at listening today, and we can take it. Obviously, we work with the Ministry of Health, but you need to work with Women's Affairs, you need to work with community development, with the water, all of those things together. So it's great for us that we talk about it on this World Food Day, but we need to make changes, whether it's legislation. So, and I think someone mentioned, you know, it's access to fizzy drinks rather than drinking clean water, or having access to good fruit. So it's all of those things together. So I'll be just listening now for the panel discussion and come in if there's a question specific for UNICEF, but also the UN as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you very much for this. So keep in mind, guys, everybody's microphone is switched on. There are some interesting questions in the chat, and I will go through those right now. And if they are not directed to specific speakers of you, then I will try to make that happen. I did learn that some people just go by their initials, so it's hard to address full names, but a person, AF, did ask an interesting question, and that was directly to you, Florence, during your presentation. And I want to point out that you did mention, Florence, we do need the food industry, and yes, I agree. And then yet at the same time we have to look at how. And the question is now really, there has been unprecedented intrusion of food corporations in nutrition policy fora in my country, with nutrition professionals and universities accepting sponsorships here and there and more. How can a country confront the issue of conflict of interest when government does not recognize this issue and is even the one letting these stakeholders, in quotation marks, in? Any country in the world which has the best practices on conflict of interest in this regard? Question mark.
Okay, I have put some links in my presentation. I saw some people wanted, so I'm following in particular the work that EPES Food is doing, and they're doing interesting work. There is, I tried to couch my presentation in a diplomatic way, and I think that accountability of the corporations is absolutely key. And I think this issue has been given a lot of attention at global level. Now, whether we're having a lot of greenwashing or whatever going on now, I'm not sure, but there is a lot of work being done by the private sector. So I posted the declaration of the private sector, but one thing is what they say, and the other thing is what is eventually going to happen, because then you've got shareholders that start putting pressure. We had, for example, the Director General, or whatever he's called, from Danone, who was actually ousted out of his job because he was getting a little too serious about sustainability. But I was in a meeting in 2021 and the preparation of the UN Food System Summit, when I heard the representative, I think it was Mars, saying, well, the transition to agroecology is unavoidable, and we, the corporations, will have to pay the cost of that transition. I say, well, now that I have heard, this is the day. But now what is going to actually happen is something else. So this subject is very much at the heart of the agenda. The fight on the ultra-processed foods is definitely on. There's more and more publications about that. And civil society has a key role to play. And again, could to play. If we don't, there are some companies I boycott when I do my food shopping because I'm not in agreement with what they're doing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Florence. Anybody else to this particular question in the panel? And keep in mind, all of your mics are switched on. Angela, you got company. So anybody on the point of conflict of interest?
I don't know. I can give you an example from Sri Lanka, a very recent one, where new food regulations in terms of advertising regulations and use of children in the advertisements were introduced, and they were about to be enacted from January 2024, where the corporate lobby could postpone it by 2 years, the implementation of the already drafted and about to be implemented legislation. And then it was it had been in discussion for many years also, and at the time of implementation it was postponed. So I don't think there are many examples where this conflict of interest has been addressed successfully, because somehow the corporate lobby can get into the policymakers' heads and pockets, unfortunately.
Thank you, Kalana. That's a good point. Maybe we just go a little bit through the questions in the chat, and we don't only talk about conflict of interest. There was a question from Alexandre Nyonshima, which I guess had been posted during the time of Emmanuel, of your presentation. Not sure. For the sake of food systems sustainability, nowadays global integration should be considered. How far are you in partnering with the rest of the world?
Actually, I don't know what to make of this question.
And
I
then
don't know, maybe
you raise your finger already. Speak up, everybody. I guess I can manage that.
You want to say something, Florence? I don't have anything.
Yeah, I was thinking on the terms of global integration. We had the COVID crisis. And at the COVID crisis, there was a lot of problem with global commodities because of transportation problems and so on. And I think now there's more and more talk about relocalizing food production for resilience. So you need a combination of both, of course. But I think it's important to say it's not one or the other, but you need to be aware of both and how that is going to ultimately reach what we would call our target, which is leave no one behind. And I'm not too sure that global integration is what is most needed to have sustainable answers for local poverty.
I agree. We have another question, which is now clearly to you, Emmanuel, and I'm actually not fully clear if you see the questions here in the starred chat or not. A person A would ask what, and I had actually the same question during your presentation, Emmanuel. What were the drivers for the improved food consumption from the CCT? If this was not purposely designed, is there a possibility that food security improved but nutritional quality suffered due to the prevalence of ultra-processed foods in the market and the highly obesogenic environment?
Yeah, well, the answer to the first part of the question is that it's income. Yeah, I mean the fact that the household has regular income, that by default sort of induces the household to consume better food and sort of become secure. And the fact is that households do in general consume more nutritious food, at least the ones that we've studied. Yeah, as as they participate in the program and they receive more cash, usually the food they consume is more nutritious. More vegetables, more fruits, more protein. Now, the extent to which they consume more what were they called? I'm blanking out now. The ultra processed foods. Yeah. Well, I mean, it depends on how easily accessible they are in their local environment. Yeah. I should say, and that also relates to the point that Florence made about, I don't know what country you were talking about, Florence, when you mentioned about social protection and families consuming ultra-processed foods.
I think it was Colombia, but I wouldn't swear. It was a Latin American country, definitely.
I know for sure in Mexico, but that was 25 years ago, when the program designers were very sort of conscious about this, that they wouldn't, the conditional cash transfer program, they knew that they was going to give more money to the families, but then they also knew that when families have more money, that will also induce local traders with their small trucks and carts to bring more better food or more food items and other products, not only food, in these isolated communities. Yeah. So now, what has happened in the last 25 years, I don't know. Probably all the major grocery stores have built branches there, and they sell ultra processed foods, making them more accessible. But at least in the early stages, that was a factor that was certainly taken into account, and it wasn't a major concern. Now maybe it is. I don't know. And obviously something needs to be done about this. Yeah, I think that's mainly what I want to say.
So we got a question from Leticia Atademos, and I think it's an interesting question. I'd just like to maybe beef it up a little bit, if possible. Thanks for the highly insightful panel. I would like to know if there are countries that successfully balance industry interests with food security goals in a sustainable way. If so, how do they achieve this? First of all, 2 points on Leticia's questions. First of all, Leticia, thank you so much for actually, among some of our other peers here and participants, spelling out your full name. I realize there is quite a few people just with a letter or an acronym. I don't know where you are based, but I think the question is good. It's interesting to get an understanding, I think, on a global level, which countries overall perform better than others when it comes to the metrics of, well, food security, sustainability, and I guess healthy nutrition overall. So anybody on the panel would have thoughts on this? And is it always the rich countries, or are there other countries who get that sort of done equally well? Over to all of you.
Yeah, there is all that work following up the UN Food System Summit, and there's a lot of discussions at country level also. But I think people, for example, working with WHO would be in a better position to say that. They've been very much working, as was mentioned already by Kamala, I think, was about reformulation of foods would be less sugar. I know countries like Chile have decided, the government has decided to put a black square on all the food they thought was not appropriate for a healthy diet. Now, whether we like it or not, there's many places where you start getting these things being discussed. Now, the problem is usually goes against the interests of some major actors in the country, in particular for food exports. So if you start looking at, well, the work you're doing, is it really contributing to better nutrition? Is it dealing with social equity? Is it dealing with sustainable environment management? The issue is probably, the answer is probably no. So how does this get reoriented? I think, Johannes, you may have a lot of insights on that too. But I think that it's really, it's the beginning. I think it's very much at the crux of what we need to all embark on in the coming years. And I think there's many things happening. Civil society, I was showing one of the pictures before, came from Oxfam because they work on this, but there's others. So I think the problem is to be aware who is already doing what and start scratching our heads, exchanging information, and trying to see how we move forward in such a way that economy still needs to move on, but we need to see how to reorient, look at the true cost of food, and look how we are going to maybe stop subsidizing things that are not healthy, and instead maybe subsidizing things that are more healthy, and that could provide local jobs. So I think it's a big picture. There's no easy answer. There's all kinds of things starting to be discussed in different corners, and the importance is to have some kind of forum. It can be at national level, and it could be within the follow-up of the UN Food System Summit. In Australia, could there be a webinar or Melbourne or whatever to raise that issue? You know, what is happening? What are the possibilities? What can we do? Can something be done, etc., etc.?
Thank you. So now I hear from Jayashree. She has a question, I think, that fits into this thing right away. So Jayashree, over to you.
Thanks, Johannes. My question, well, I actually have a couple of questions, one for Angela first, and then Florence, Angela and Kalana. So there was mention in Kalana's talk that the school meal programs and the homegrown school feeding program is quite a success in Sri Lanka. And I'm just thinking about Papua New Guinea in the Pacific. Angela, why do you think that there isn't very much political will in Papua New Guinea to try and lift the nutritional status of, well, I would say school-age children, because you did mention about the first 1,000 days and mothers' nutrition being very important. But I also, in my own experience in Papua New Guinea, happened to see school-age children not eating very well, or quality of their diet is very, very poor. Here is something that the government can do something about. So why isn't there that political will?
Thank you for the difficult question, and the Papua New Guinea government, of course, will need to respond. It's interesting, there are still many, many children out of school in Papua New Guinea. So our school roles are very challenging for us. We were talking as a team yesterday on out of school children, so how many we would miss by a nutrition program anyway, because there's all these hidden school fees, even in government schools, of its uniform and books and water money and whatever. So many, many children are out of school. But also you see, having worked here many, many decades ago. And the difference now is that there's a lot, we're still at 85% rural population. So a lot of them subsistence farmers. So there should be not this undernutrition. And so it's a whole thing where the children are having many bouts of diarrhea because of not clean water, because mothers, I said, haven't been to school and know all of those things. But it's just huge pressure on families on other things, whether it's your paracetamol or your antibiotics, or is it dad's beer money? So it's all of those things. And I think I just was this morning, I launched the FAO's World Food Day with the Ministry of Agriculture here and FAO. And actually they didn't really talk about schools at all. I've had over the many years of the experience of school gardens, and there's so much positiveness around this if children can learn to do school gardens. But all of these kids go to the gardens anyway here. But of course, cash crops or fishing all day and then selling the fish at the market to buy tinned fish. There's lots of things. So it's a real challenge for us to have the government work with us and guide us on these SDGs, the MDGs, whatever we're talking about. And I think school nutrition, yes, it's a very difficult task. We will not give up. We will talk to the Minister of Education, the ministry. It's also a very complicated political system with many changes of senior government staff often around political decisions that are taken, and then the decentralisation process here from federal level to province level, and the money is a big thing. So we need to look at all of those things. But thanks for the question and the acknowledgement that it is difficult, but we won't give up.
Thank you. Florence, you did mention in passing about political backing for any program to be successful, and particularly in assuring food security in any country in whichever way that is possible. So in my research, I've just found 2 countries who actually have something called a National Food Security Act. And it was, the first one is in India. It was the very first country to legalize in some way and pass the National Food Security Act, but it was mainly to make sure that 2/3 of the population in India were definitely covered through food subsidies in some way, particularly for food grains. And the other one in 2016 was something called the Global Food Security Act in the US. And that was mainly to commit to tackle the root causes of hunger through a program called Feed the Future. Now, if no country is really going to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, why is it that other countries do not take the cue from actually legalizing food security in some way and assuring its people of availability of food? So nutrition is a second level, but at least making food available in the first place. So why isn't it not happening?
Well, it's a $1 million question, Jayashree. The problem, if technicians were able to solve that, and we're talking politics, right? There's several countries that have done a lot of very interesting work. There's a lot of work that's interesting in Brazil. There's some work that's interesting at global level, but then at local level, it's not happening. So I think it's different shades of gray rather than you've got the goodies and the baddies. The problem is you've got a situation, how does that improve? What you mentioned 2 countries. One is India. What was really interesting at the time, I was working on the Standing Committee on Nutrition, and there was a Right to Food group that was working there. India was extremely active, but not the government. Civil society was extremely active. And I think civil society has been very instrumental in pushing its government to pass the act you're mentioning. So I think it's very important that we see what's going on, not like a scientific subject to study, but like a fight in which to engage. and that we all have interest in, we can move forward. The second country you mentioned is the US. Well, the US is not exactly the country that has either endorsed the right to food. It doesn't have a food law or whatever, because in order to be elected as president, you need a lot of money, and the people that are paying for your election are going to make sure you're not going to do that. On the other hand, there's a lot of very interesting experiences going on in the US, as we well know. So I think it's important to build on the positive experience and give them visibility. And then you can say, and you go to the government, so it's wonderful what you do in your country, which is what we kept doing in FAO. I used to go and say, I go to Haiti and say, we need to improve nutrition, say, Ministry of Health is next door. I say, well, in my country, people eat agricultural product. Okay, you can stay. But in a way, you really have that key drift between health and food. And that's a major problem we need to deal with also. There is a lot now in the States going on. They're reinventing farmers' markets because they give people couch vouchers that they can use only to buy fruits and vegetables at the local farmers' market. So these are experiences. It's living labs. Let's see how it works. They're working more and more on cities. There's huge work now being done by New York City in order to change their food supply system for their schools, their hospitals, and so on. And they're working in collaboration with Copenhagen and Barcelona, blah, 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 blah. So lots of things happening. Look around you in the countries you're working in. Certainly you are already aware of what's going on, but there may be other stakeholders we don't think of that we may want to have a beer with, or a cup of coffee, whatever is culturally acceptable, to try and see, okay, what is it we could try and do? And then how can we publicize this so that the others get the idea? And the horizontal collaboration across this is really key, because my own experience has been trying to subvert a UN organization can only be done by linking with other agents of change in other organizations and then moving the process forward. If not, institutions, government institutions, etc., are extremely bureaucratic, extremely slow to react. That's the beauty of the private sector. It can react more quickly as long as it follows the right ethics. So I think that we need to see who can do what. Civil society can work as watchdog also to say, wait a minute, you're saying this, you're doing the country. So I think we're talking strategy, we're talking dialogue, we're talking joint planning, and much more than scientific publications. But that's my take.
Perfect. So maybe I can, we're coming slowly to an end. Maybe we will do 1 or 2 minutes over if you guys are okay. I do have 2 questions I really want to get rid of, and I'm doing here a question that came from Lijun Summer Hayes, and I will just extend that question a little bit, and that goes to you, Sakile. Is there any data available showing the increase in affordability in these biofortified stable foods while achieving the significant enhancement in their nutritional value? Any side effects found so far? And my add-on to that question to you, Sakile, would be, is there any clinical work happening in this whole biofortified domain to really make strong and substantiated claims? Are you aware? Are you involved with clinical studies, clinical trials?
Yes, thank you very much. And thanks for the question. Indeed. Am I audible?
All good, yes.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much for the question. Indeed, I need to explain that the biofortified varieties are not any more cheaper or any more expensive compared to the non-biofortified counterparts for the same varieties. They are grown in exactly the same way. It's just a variety that's more nutrient dense. So what we are saying is that by having biofortified varieties in the diet, you basically reduce the cost of a healthier diet, because you are now getting more minerals and vitamins from a cereal that was if non-biofortified had less minerals and vitamins. So that's the impact on the affordability. And then in terms of clinical trials, indeed, this was all part of the studies that had to be done before biofortification could be scaled up to see if there is efficacy. And we have a lot of trials that have been done in India with school children, for example, who are consuming iron biofortified pearl millet, and there's been a marked change in the iron status as well as in their cognizance and the learning abilities. And the same goes also for studies that have been done in Rwanda with women at universities, and there's been a marked change again in their iron status from the consumption of iron biofortified beans. And as I said, the research is ongoing and more efficacy trials are being done. Even women in Zambia, another example of a trial that comes to my mind immediately, where there's been a marked increase in the vitamin A, even in the breast milk, when they consume vitamin A maize. So the clinical trials are there, and more are being done to show and prove that indeed the nutrition status increases from consuming biofortified crops. I don't know, I think I missed another component of the question, Johannes.
I think Sakile, so thank you very much. I think you got it all. And as you know, I'm always very fond of Harvest Plus work. We are here at 6 o'clock. We lost somehow Florence. I don't know what's happening. I hope she tells me she's trying to re-enter. So I hope we get you back, Florence. I don't want to really significantly go over time. I do have one question though, and I mentioned already, I will take the prerogative of running this panel to ask the question close to my heart. We are a university in the Southern Hemisphere in a chemical engineering school, and I'm responsible with others for a big food program. What is it that you guys actually really think we should be doing? Is there anything where I can sort of pick your brains and you from all of the different places on this planet where you're joining us can tell us what would be interesting, what are the problems to solve, and what's the type of study that you would be interested to see UNSW conduct. Maybe we really start here. We have Florence. I repeat my question, Florence. I'm happy you're back. The question is, what is it that we as a big academic research focused organization in the Southern Hemisphere, in the Pacific, what is it we should do, or what is it you think we should get involved with on a research and scientific level? I will ask all of you, and maybe I just start with Kalana.
Yeah, I think from a scientific point of view, I think what we increasingly being encountered is the evidence for, like, for example, areas like fortification. So I think there is a growing body of evidence to suggest both biofortification and I think the post-harvest fortification techniques like the extrusion and infusion techniques are now slightly advanced. And certainly for the extrusion technology, there is a lot of evidence getting accumulated. But I think there is still room for this type of evidence. And also different types of, different micronutrients, different vehicles that could be used for fortification is another area that you can maybe help us with. Especially when we try to, now there's a if I give you a very specific example quickly, is that now there is a red or brown variety of rice that we consume in Sri Lanka which cannot be fortified with iron pyrophosphate. Now this has been a area for research for a number of years in Sri Lanka with little or no success. I think people like you coming from chemical engineering into food science, I think we can work together to come up with rice varieties, different combinations of micronutrients formulations to address some of these issues like this. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalana. Would be nice then, Sakile, to have Harvest Plus on board as well. What are your thoughts?
Indeed. I think also just answer the question on what you can do as a chemical department. I think obviously there's a lot of more work to be done on biofortification, but beyond biofortification as well, I think there's a lot more nutrition hiding in our neglected and underutilized indigenous foods across the many different countries, where we need more research to find out the gold that's hiding in them before we lose them and lose that precious nutritional value. And also as a department as well, I think what comes to mind immediately is food processing. We need the everyday foods, the instant noodles that were spoken about, made from probably healthier ingredients than unusual ingredients, so that we really get more of our now newly acquired tastes, food types, from the more nutritious or indigenous foods that we are losing because of their now reduced commercial value, because they're not being processed much. I hope that's clear enough. Thanks.
Florence, over to you. What should we do at UNSW?
We need academia. We need academia to do something else than publishing, because nobody reads publication any longer. So we need academia to sit with the actors in food system transformation to see what they can do to help. I've put two things in the chat. One has, whatever it's worth, in each of the country, there is now a national food convener that's looking and coming with national pathways. I put the link. You can see in the countries in which you're working what they're doing, and see if it's worth talking with those guys or seeing what's already going on. And the second thing I've put is there is a convergence initiative, which I find quite interesting right now. It's a convergence on climate change and food systems, because it's completely stupid to go on doing all these things, all these topics, which we know are interdisciplinary, which we know are comprehensive, and then doing more and more committees where the same people go to the meetings. So I think it's absolutely key to latch on whatever discussions are already going on in the country in which you are operating, getting your students to look at what's happening in their country, getting some of your students do their master's level, for example, and seeing what could be done in those areas and what it is you can bring to the picture.
Thank you very much. So Emmanuel and then Angela.
Yeah, I mean, as I would say, a stronger advocacy role, and not so much the research, which, you know, of course there's value to research, but the advocacy role, especially within East Asia, is important because, you know, the big governments like Indonesia, they only focus on stunting, for example. You know, there's a big national stunting reduction strategy, but Indonesia is suffering from the double burden of malnutrition. You know, obesity is a big problem. So you have in the same household a stunted child and an obese mother. So, you know, increasing awareness at the national level and you know, providing possible alternatives or solutions or products that could address both of these issues would be, at the same time, you know, would be I think very beneficial, at least in the local area here. Yeah, that's the.
I did like Florence, your comment. Nobody reads papers. I would not fully subscribe to that, but there is really too much attention to papers, and now this is being replaced by social media, which is even worse. But there should be definitely more advocacy. I could not agree more.
You should get money to do something else than write publications, and be able to answer to requests to technical assistance without having to tell us, I need to finish that publication. If not, I will have no more money for my department.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Angela, maybe you have some final thoughts from your perspective on that.
Just so grateful listening to everyone, and you just said it, social media. Of course, the teenagers, the misinformation, disinformation, the absolute lies that are happening now. And so all of that stuff that you're teaching your students is fantastic if they can be thinking about what's going to happen. But with 85% of Papua New Guinea still living in rural areas, we've almost forgotten how to use community radio. You know, we just think of TikTok and whatever, all of that. But really, when you go outside Port Moresby and the main cities, there's no electricity, or there's whatever. You know, the old-fashioned wind-up radios that those of us who worked in Africa remember. In Afghanistan, I remember using a BBC Foundation for really telling amazingly good stories for women on child nutrition 25, 30 years ago. I think we have to go back to some of that basics. We certainly within the UN want to read academic papers, but we also want to be help us to be very practical and remember the influence that we must have with government. So we're not a Save the Children or an Oxfam or a World Vision. We're a part of the UN, and we then have to get into ministries of agriculture, ministries of fishery, but also ministries of health and women. So thanks for everybody. I don't have a magic bullet for it here, but look forward to continuing this discussion online and reading those great articles. Thanks for that. My team left because of law and order. They have to get home before dark. So there's lots of challenges here. Thanks.
So thank you all again, Florence, Emmanuel, Kalana, Sakile, and Angela. Thank you all. Thank you actually also then, of course, Jayashree. We thank each other, I guess. Thank you the Doppler company who sort of helped us in broadcasting all of this. There have been some glitches, but we were aware they might happen, and I think it went okay. This was really an insightful and learningful day. At our end of the world, it's getting evening. I guess we start to really celebrate one way or another something. Again, thank you so much. The whole webcast will be put on YouTube. We might be editing this at some point. We did have 365 registrations for this entire event, which I think is good, speaks for itself. And I do apologize if some questions had not been answered. I think everybody who is still here in that chat also, or in the webcast, does have mine and our coordinates. If it's urgent, please drop us an email again. Thank you very much, and we're looking forward to repeating this. This seems to me like a success story already. Thanks again, and you all have a nice day, nice world.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.